Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin.
Hello, everyone. I'm Charles Laughlin, your co-host, joined by Mike Boland. Mike?
Hi, Charlie. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. We'll be saying that for a while. I think we covered that on the last episode. So, Mike, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what's on your mind, what you're working on?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Last week, or in the last episode, we talked about sort of the propensity for the tech press to jump all over any sort of quote unquote killer designations.
Right.
Like so and so is the latest Google killer, right? It's the Schadenfreude, it's all that stuff we talked about. And of course, it's always overblown. So sort of the latest example of that I've been watching is sort of calling the death of ad-supported media in general. And I think that there are two things driving that. So one is the age of privacy reform, where, you know, the legislative and platform level reform drastically inhibits the data collection that has sort of previously driven the golden age of ad tech, the unchecked era of just like targeting. And you know, it got a bit abusive, out of control, and now obviously we're in this sort of privacy moment, and you know, the ad supported media has been called as like the victim of that, and it is, but you know, it's not dying. The second faction is the Web3 crowd, and we talked about this last week, where, you know, instead of audience aggregators like media companies and social networks that essentially provide free content in return for enduring ads, the idea is for all of that to be replaced by this sort of decentralized peer-to-peer media consumption and compensation model, where you basically sort of pay artists and entertainers or whoever's entertainers, directly through micropayments. So in that sort of worldview, the social networks, the media networks, they all go away. And as we talked about last week, the issue there is that, you know, if you kill the network, you also kill the network effect and the mechanics for content aggregation and discovery. But that's a different point. Back to this sort of death of ad-supported media, the Web3 crowd believes it really has no part in this like new regime. So basically, boiling all that down, if you look at all of the above, there's one major issue, and all of this sort of speaking on behalf of consumers and their interests and all this sort of virtue stroking, no one thought to ask everyday consumers what they actually want, because it turns out that they don't want to pay for media, at least all of their media. There's still, you know, some premium content. You pay for your movies, your Spotify subscription, a lot of subscription-based businesses doing well these days. But what we're talking about here in these sort of overblown sort of media is dead sort of narratives is like paying for everything that you consume instead of enduring ads, which again, no one really wants. So to wrap some numbers around that, Gallup and the Knight Foundation asked consumers, and they framed it with the proxy of news content, right? So it turns out that only 9% of consumers want to pay for that content, and a majority at 52% think it should be ad supported and are okay with that. And the remaining sort of part of the sample was calling for things like, you know, government should pay for it or this or that. But anyway, 52% said they're okay with ads. Only 9% want to pay directly. And then in closing here, it's interesting. The only segment that did sort of over-index for wanting to pay for content was the rich. So individuals who make $150,000 or more per year, 15% of them, or among the survey respondents, wanted to pay for news instead of seeing ads. And, you know, obviously they have the money to pay for it,
Right.
compared with, again, 9% of the overall sample. So all in all, these movements are sort of virtuous in their intent, but a bit delusional in that they don't align with what, you know, consumers actually want vis-a-vis ad-supported media.
Okay. That's really interesting. And you know, I sort of share your skepticism about the death of ad-supported media, and that data you just cited seems to back us up here, back our instincts up a little bit. I think what is interesting, and this is a world that we've both sort of traveled into one degree or another, is the amount of sort of niche content out there that is not ad supported, but that is subscription supported. I'm thinking of
Yeah,
the newsletter world, which has become a big deal over the last few years. You know,
definitely.
Substack, and there's a bunch of Substack competitors now. Um, Patreon was kind of what Substack came after, and now there's Beehive and a bunch of others. And there's a lot of big name journalists over the years have migrated from the ad supported media world into the subscription supported media world, becoming Substack bros, so as it were. And some have done quite well, but I think there's a general perception that after your 150K plus per year wage earner has bought 3 to 4 Substack subscriptions, they're not going to buy the fourth or fifth or sixth, and
Yeah.
so it's kind of a world that's limited to a few players at the top of the pyramid. That's my gut sense of that,
Yeah.
and I don't know where that goes.
That's a good point. And I should say, to sort of qualify all of the above,
Mhm.
that the sort of, I alluded to this a little bit, the sort of subscription based model, and that includes the things you mentioned, newsletters. It's also like streaming services,
Sure.
Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO Max. All of these are actually doing quite well, and it's good to see that sort of the world has been conditioned to start to pay for more,
Right.
especially with respect to like good journalism. Like when you look at the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, The Economist, people are paying for their sort of digital subscriptions, and that wasn't the case 10 years ago when everyone was sort of calling for the death of newspapers. I think it just took a transition. So it's good to see all that. And there's always going to be some mix, right? Some mix of the content you consume that is premium and you're paying for, and then some that is ad supported. And so I guess that what that means is like nothing to see here, folks. Like all of this sort of hand waving about this sort of revolution in content consumption and compensation. It's sort of like the same dance but a different song. We're going to continue to have this mix. Now the shares within that mix could shift, more subscription, less ad supported media content, but
Yeah.
all in all what we're going to end up with is both. Where the sort of premium stuff tends to be the stuff you pay for, and the sort of backfilled daily content, the background stuff, the network TV, radio, all of these things are going to continue to be ad supported, and we'll simply have both.
And I think there's a different set of expectations among the consumer of the content for
Yeah.
what they're getting. I mean, what you're getting from Netflix, what you're getting from a Substack newsletter that you really look forward to landing in your email
Yeah.
box versus the free newsletters that you ignore,
Yeah.
and you really expect from something you're paying a premium rate for, you're expecting
Yeah.
something very specific and very high quality and very
Yeah. Specific is the key word.
uh, messed with, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uninterfered with, I guess, in terms of editorial direction.
Yeah, specific is the key word. There are a few sort of signals or I guess attributes that
Yeah.
sort of go into that price elasticity equation of what am I willing to pay for. And I think a few things are, one, obviously quality. That higher premium quality stuff, like, I'll mention a few names again. The Economist, people
Right.
pay for The Economist, The New Yorker, stuff like that. But also the specificity, I think, is an important point. If you are someone that is, say, an ad executive, you might pay for the subscription to Adweek or Media Post or those sort of, parochial or vertically specific things where
Right.
you're getting specific domain expertise where it helps you do your job better, makes you more informed, as opposed to more sort of generalist content. So I think that specificity tends to get people to open their wallets.
And that's why these newsletter platforms are interesting because there's probably, I don't know the name of the newsletter, but there's probably a retired ad exec who launched a Substack, maybe after
Yeah.
6 months of building a free audience, went paid so that that ad exec could get really, really high level, insightful content around the direction of the ad industry or something.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's several of those on these platforms. And there's probably a few players doing quite well creating that content and selling it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a very new world in terms. It's very atomized. It's very fractionalized, but in a way I think that serves the consumer more
Yeah.
so than
More
takes
choice,
something
more
away from
optionality.
them, or requires it may require them to go to more places to complete their information diet.
Yeah.
But there's more rich content out there.
Yeah, and that sort of gets closer to some of those Web3 ideals, which it sounds like I
Yeah.
was totally trashing. I'm actually behind that decentralization. Substack it gets closer to that idea of peer-to-peer, paying people for their time and their talent, as Scott Galloway likes to say. And I think that's a good thing, but like some of the Web3 fanaticism has just gone a little too far, but it actually at its heart has a lot of good virtues in terms of
Yeah.
where media is already going and should.
Yeah.
Now, Charlie, let's move on. That's a very macro topic. I think it's interesting. You also today have a very macro topic in terms of like some of these overall trends, but yours is less about media and more about the way we work and the continued shifts in the sort of workplace, hybrid, all that.
Yeah, I just published something on Localogy Insider, our online publication at Localogy, which you and I both contribute to. Regarding Shopify this week, I don't know if they announced internally and then the memo leaked out. I imagine without much resistance from Shopify to venues like Bloomberg and CNN who reported on it. And the basic gist was that Shopify issued an internal edict among its employees. This is not a product feature. This is a workplace ruling at Shopify that recurring meetings, basically the dreaded Wednesday at 10 a.m. Zoom, product roadmap check-in call, is now being eliminated. And so basically, all recurring meetings swept out of the calendars of Shopify employees. And they said there's a 2-week cooling off period. I don't know from what date, from whatever date that memo went out. I think it was earlier this week. 2 weeks before you can even think about rescheduling that recurring meeting. And I think they've just created a cultural norm with one memo, or at least they're trying to, a cultural norm of resisting meetings like this. Basically, if you don't want to be in the meeting, you can hit no. And you have permission, the permission has come from the C-suite on down that we're now a culture of saying no to meetings, essentially. And what I thought was interesting about this is I learned about it from all the people commenting about it on LinkedIn, which is how I learn about a lot of things I end up writing about. But in this case, I thought it was interesting that people were jumping in and saying, yay, Shopify, here's why this is awesome. Here's why I think maybe it didn't go far enough or whatever. What was interesting is the ones I noticed were from people who were big and local, and I'll name two in just a second, who were building future of work businesses. So I think what it sort of said to me is because I think last week on the podcast actually we just published earlier this week, one of the things we talked about was, will 2023 be a year of startups? And what will be the categories that people are going to pour their time and energy and dollars into to launch? And I said, it's got to be AI, metaverse. I was just throwing things out into the air because I had to say something. I think one of the other ones I didn't think of at that moment, but now is occurring to me, is that I'm wondering if future of work will be one of those categories that will be getting a lot of attention this year. And so the two who weighed in on this were Howard Lerman, who we've written about, we've talked about a lot. He's launched Roam, RO.am, which is basically a software environment for running a hybrid workplace. He's out there just trying his best to get us aware of what Roam is, what problems it's trying to solve. And basically the problem he says it's trying to solve is the default 30-minute Zoom meeting is like the default norm from hell. He didn't say it in those words, that's my paraphrasing. And the other was David Shim, who I think you know pretty well, Mike. Used to run Foursquare. And then he has launched, I think both of these companies were launched in 2021, notably, pandemic year. Something called Read AI. I don't think there's a dot in there. There might be. And this is basically a AI-driven, as the name suggests, set of tools to optimize the effectiveness of online meetings. So you get an automatic transcript, real-time metrics on what engagement is like within the meeting, after-action reports, TLDRs, here's what you're committed to do in the meeting. It's, lots of reporting and robust extraction of insights and findings and action items from meetings. Really interesting idea. So these guys are both building companies trying to use the most advanced technology available to optimize the sort of new hybrid work environment, and made me wonder who else is building around this topic as well. So that's basically what was getting my attention today.
Yeah. Very interesting. So like a lot of the comments you read, I applaud this move by Shopify. I think that the sort of repetitive motion of recurring meetings can be toxic in that, it doesn't let this sort of the dynamics or the merits of a given topic or need to have a conversation lead the way. It's sort of form over function. It's like it just becomes, I need to talk to you for 5 minutes, or I may need to talk to you for an hour and a half about something more in depth, but it just seems to get shoved into this container that is a 30-minute weekly meeting, or we don't need a meeting this week, but we kind of do it anyway. And I think it's become an environment where underperformers sort of use that to like, oh, we got a meeting coming up at noon. It's 10 a.m. now. I'm not doing anything till then. And then after the meeting, now I got to wind down. And it just becomes this sort of
right, instead of do the things you agreed to do in the meeting or whatever.
Yeah, one of the things to make underperformers seem or feel busy, but also it puts the cart before the horse. I guess that's the bigger point. It puts the cart before the horse in terms of the functionality of the thing I need to get done, and I need your time, and we need to collaborate on it. And let's let that lead. Let's let form follow function, as they say. And I think that's one of the core tenets around Rome and what Howard's doing. In that, let's let form follow function, where the corporate norm for years and years and years in this sort of highly structure everything is form over function, and that's the heart of these sort of these meetings. And I shouldn't say, I'm hesitant to make these blanket comments. That's sort of how I feel. There are some environments where maybe you have a lot of millennials or just new trainees and they need hyperstructure. Sometimes you need environments where that sort of gets in the way. And I think that it's situationally dependent, but just in theory, I definitely applaud this in just, letting the sort of needs and the functionality of executives that need to be productive and need to collaborate, just sort of formulate that, on a day-to-day basis in their sort of time management, and standing meetings just sort of, I think, are antithetical to that.
Right. Well, I think one of the premises behind Rome, as Howard articulated, I didn't talk to him, but he's done a lot about this specifically. He will be at our conference next April to talk about this and related topics. But what he has said publicly about this, I think I alluded to a moment ago, was, the default 30-minute Zoom meeting being sort of, he's used a lot of words to describe how bad that is. But basically, Rome's idea is that in the days of yore, the one-to-one serendipitous impromptu meeting was how a lot of creative ideas got ignited and pursued. And the idea is he wants to recreate that environment where those short impromptu meetings occur, as opposed to a lot of structured scheduled meetings that maybe are at a sort of default amount of time that's either way too little or way too much for what needs to be handled, right? And he said, like, the average meeting length is 8 minutes 34 seconds. I assume that will have to change over time. I don't think that can be a static average meeting length. That's the number he's been using, which sounds like a reasonable amount of time to have a good conversation about a single topic, right? Yeah. And 30 minutes seems way too much for that. Not nearly enough to, do a lot of things, and way too much for most things that we do during the course of a workday. Anyway, so this is an interesting, it was very interesting that this got so much traction, at least on LinkedIn. I didn't see one person say, oh, Shopify, that's a really bad idea to to get rid of recurring meetings. No one hated that idea. Everyone was like, hell yeah. And I didn't see one comment that said, Shopify might want to give this a second thought. The only thing Shim said was it didn't go deep enough, but that was kind of pointing people towards what he's trying to do, which is do much more deep work around extracting value out of meetings, and using software to do that, which is fine. And I think it's an interesting startup. But his take was sort of, I think both of their takes were dictated by what they're trying to achieve with their businesses. But the general takeaway from what Shopify is doing is Yes, hell yes. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot more companies are going to get a lot more chatter on Slack saying, when are we going to do a Shopify and get rid of all these? I've got 8 recurring meetings a week and I'd like to have 0. Can
Yeah.
we do that?
Well,
So,
I'll tell you, my M&A flag just went up as you were talking when we look at
hmm
what Rome's doing, and what David Shim is doing
hmm
with Read AI in terms of like some synergies there in terms of Howard structuring these meetings, and then David for sort of analytics on the
right.
meeting. So there could be some
You can,
non-overlapping synergies we see there. So those two should be talking to each other if they're not
I would
already.
think, because you would think Howard would and his team would be working on, okay, what happens in that 834
Yeah,
one-on-one that supposedly is going on all day long,
there you
and
go.
what is being extracted from that? Are you extracting takeaways? Is it being recorded? Is it, I don't know.
Read
Sorry.
AI does some other interesting analytics where it's sort of biometric signals.
Hmm.
Apparently, what they can do is they can sort of detect when people are losing interest in a topic. So it can be
Right.
structure sort of analytics, but also content analytics. Like you lose them when you start talking about X, Y, Z.
If I understand it, there's like a dash real time during the meeting. You can sort of monitor. It's almost like monitoring the heart rate, the
It
vital
looks like an EKG.
signs. It's like the
Right.
vital
Yeah.
signs of the meeting as it's happening, and
Exactly.
you can see if people are nodding off in effect
Yep.
and losing interest or drifting away. So you can sort of conduct it, sort of a dashboard, like it's like a literal like car dashboard for, I got to slow down, I got to speed up, I got to whatever, in order to keep this meeting humming along. Okay.
Exactly.
Really interesting stuff. I don't know how well it's doing, to be honest with you. And I think we should catch up with David soon to find out what's going on with that thing. So, any rate, Mike, I think this is a good point to end it for this week in local. Thanks for joining today, and thanks to all of you out there for joining us. And we hope that you are enjoying the podcast and that you will subscribe, rate, and review, and reach out to us if you're interested in giving us feedback or if you're interested in talking to us about having a guest on sometime soon, which we will begin relatively soon. Still no announcement there, but it's coming. Mike, anything else?
Thanks, Charlie. Nope.
Okay, we'll end it there.
Happy New
Thanks,
Year.
everyone. Happy New Year. Bye bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.